Well, it's that wonderful time of the year. Snow is somewhere in the air, jingle bells are on the radio, and here at Life Point Church we have a fresh look at the Bible's Christmas story. And I'm pretty excited about what we're doing this Christmas, because this year I'm going to teach you a part of the Bible that Christians hardly ever read. It's so rare to read this, in fact, that for many of you this will be the first time you've ever heard this part of the Bible being explained. And for those of you who have heard this being explained before, you've probably never heard it explained by someone quite as brilliant as myself. So either way, it's your lucky day. Now, before we get into this, let me just say that in order for you to understand the Christmas story that we're going to read this morning, you have to first of all understand that these words were written by a bad Jew. Not a Jew, a bad Jew. You'll remember from your history books, I suppose, that following the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, the worldview, the philosophies, the ideas, the cultures of ancient Greece very deliberately imposed themselves on the remains of Alexander's empire, including Palestine. And so when this happens in the 3rd century, in the 2nd century, in the 1st centuries before Christ, a Jewish culture that for hundreds of years had always been very conservative, always been very traditional, began to fray at the edges. What this meant was that in every Jewish village, Greek gymnasiums opened up, and young men started working out, trying to look like chiseled Greeks, like Hercules. Greek places of learning became more popular than Jewish ones. Aristotle replaced Moses as the subject matter of choice. Greek social customs, Greek fashions, Greek architecting, Greek dramas and plays and habits all became the new fashion in Israel. So in the centuries immediately before the birth of Jesus, Palestine, like the rest of the world, was becoming Greek, right? Then in the middle part of the 1st century BC, about 60 BC or so, the Romans came into Israel, and they were just like the Greeks, only a little bit better organized, slightly more fashionable, and their coffee was a lot better. And seriously, have you ever tried that Greek stuff? It's nasty. And when all of that's happening, okay, when Greek culture and Roman culture is imposing itself upon the conservative and traditional culture of Palestine, the people who called themselves good Jews, they were separating themselves from the badness of Greco-Roman culture. And Saint Matthew, who wrote the opening words of the New Testament and the original Christmas story, Saint Matthew was not a good Jew. He was a bad one. We know that he was a tax collector. That meant he was a cheat, an extortionist, a liar. His lifestyle would have been more Greco-Roman than Jewish. His large home would have had a Roman mosaic on the floor. His garden would have been decorated with naked Greek statues. For relaxation, he would have hung out in the Greek gymnasium. He would have chilled out in the Roman baths. His parties would have looked a lot more like Roman orgies than they would Torah Bible studies. In every sense, Saint Matthew was a bad Jew, and that's not all. He was a bad person. To the core, a horrible human being. And at some point in his life, we know that he meets Jesus. This meeting, if I may misquote Karl Barth, is a moment in his life that changes all subsequent moments in his life. This is Christianity. It is a moment in life that changes all the moments thereafter. So he stops being an extortionist who lives for money and starts being a follower of Jesus who lives for others. And unlike the good Jews among whom he lives, Saint Matthew believes that there is room in the heart of God for everyone. people whose lives are damaged by mistakes, people whose pasts are full of sordid episodes, people who are filled with so much regret and pain and shame that they're pretty sure God has given up on them. And Matthew spends his life telling this story, telling people that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. That's Matthew's message, essentially. Every single saint you know has a past. Every single sinner you see has a future. And unless you understand that Matthew's audience are bad Jews just like he is and was, with complicated, messy life stories, you won't understand Matthew's opening words of the New Testament and of the Christmas story. So now that you do understand it, you're welcome. Let's get to it. Okay, so what we're looking at this morning is the opening sentences of the New Testament. This is for Matthew the story that changes all stories, regardless of how messy and painful. Chapter 1, verse 1. What you are about to read is a story of Jesus, and here's how it begins. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. A genealogy, as you all know, is a family tree. So what Matthew is saying here is, guys, I've got the story to tell you, right? And it's a story that changes everything. It's a story about how every good person you know has a past, every bad person you know has a future. It's an awesome story. And I want to begin that story by explaining to you where Jesus comes from. And he goes through Jesus' family tree. I didn't put it on the screen because I don't type that good. I'll just read it to you. All right? I'll give you an advance. It's boring. Here goes. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Herzon, Herzon the father of Ram, Ram the father of Avinadab, Avinadab the father of Nashon, Nashon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jeroam, Jeroam the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Ammon, Ammon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. And then after the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Atzor, Atzor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Akim, Akim the father of Eliud, Eliud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. How inspiring is that? That is literally about as exciting as reading the phone book. And here's why that matters. If you do a course in creative writing, one of the first things that your teacher will drum into your head is that the opening scene of the movie, the opening words of the book, the opening line in your short story has to grip the imagination. You have to give the viewer of the movie you're writing some reason to keep watching. And that is exactly why in all the good movies that you enjoy, the opening scene, even before the credits roll, they always manage to squeeze in an explosion, a car chase, a murder, and a little bit of intrigue. Because it grips your attention. It's like those warnings they put on like Game of Thrones, you know, the ones... warning, this is for a mature audience only. It contains scenes of violence and occasional nudity and bad language. And you think, yes! Got a result! Give me a reason to watch the thing. Give me a reason to read your story, to keep going to the end. I read this. I don't want to read past page 1. I'm dying here. But these words would not have been dull to a first century Jew. First century Jews were fascinated with these sorts of genealogical lists and family trees. It was very important for these people to know where they came from. Even today, Jews are very fastidious about this sort of thing. It matters to them to keep a record of who their grandparents were, and who their great-grandparents were, and where they lived, and what they did, and how they behaved. This is important in their culture. They need to know from whom they came. Now, human nature is human nature. And first century Jews, particularly the good ones, they were, how shall I say, they were selective with the information they included in their family tree. Have any of you ever done your family tree? I don't know why I asked, I can't even see your hands. So I did my family tree, and I traced my lineage back to 1746. I come from a long line of peasants, and there's one particular thing that piques my interest. I have a great-great-great-great-grandmother, whatever, and she had a son, and I've actually seen her birth certificate. In the option for father, there's 2 names. And those 2 names are separated by the word or. What's going on, Grandma? One of the names, he was a soldier in the Sudan. I don't know. Right. A first century Jew, a good one, would never include that information in their family tree. Here's how it worked, right? If your great-great-great-great-grandfather had been an important business person who invented scissors or something, right? And made millions out of his invention, you definitely include that information in the family tree. You definitely talk about that ancestor of yours at family gatherings. But if one of your ancestors had been in prison and married his first cousin or something, you wouldn't mention that. You'd white out that information from the family tree, and you'd never talk about it at social gatherings. Which makes Jesus' family tree spectacularly unusual. Because peppered throughout Matthew's list of Jesus' forebearers, there are surprising names, and they're all women. And when Matthew's first century audience read the names of these women, they would have been, what? I thought this was a story that changed everything. I thought this was a story about how the world and our lives within it would change for the better. And what are these names doing here? The first of whom is mentioned in sentence number 3 of the New Testament. Let's read it. Judah, important guy, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. The second, Matthew's audience read the female name Tamar. Their minds immediately go back to what might be the Bible's ugliest story. Let me tell you the story. It comes from the book of Genesis. So we're talking about a Bronze Age story from ancient Mesopotamia. And even within its Mesopotamian context, it is ugly. So ugly, I don't even know why it's in the Bible, to be honest. Ready to hear about Jesus' grandma? At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There, Judah. Now, Judah's one of the big heroes of the Bible. Very important figure. Very important. Big guy. He matters, all right? He married this woman and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Thanks for the biology lesson. We know how it works. The son was named I think should have been a doctor. That would have been awesome. What's your name? Dr. E.R. Oh, yeah. Anyway. You're an easy crowd. So they have this son called She conceived again and gave birth to another son called Onan. Then she gave birth to still another son, no holding this woman back, and named him Shelah. I guess she was naming him that to toughen him up later in life. I don't know. Okay, so are you with me so far? What the Bible is telling us here is that there's this guy called Judah, big important guy in the Bible story. This guy's mentioned in Jesus' family tree. Lots of Jewish parents name their kids Judah. Big important guy, right? Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Okay? Next sentence. Judah, as was the custom at the time, got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn son, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. That's not good. So why did he die? God didn't like him. Killed him. Bummer for him. So now what you have is son number 1 is gone, leaving a widow, a childless widow called Tamar. Still with me? Good. Thank you. Next sentence. Then Judah said to Onan, his second son, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a mother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. What? What? Now, just before you reach for your vomit bucket, please remember this is the Bronze Age, okay? This is ancient Mesopotamia. So we can make allowances for their weirdness. What's happening in this odd, peculiar moment is that Er's premature death has made his brother Onan subject to a thing called the Levirate law. This was a strange custom practiced all over the ancient Near East, which was designed to give women a degree of financial stability. Remember, in the ancient world, there's no such thing as women's rights, and in the ancient world, there's no such thing as social care. So it was very difficult for a woman, in fact almost impossible, for a woman to get a job and support herself financially. So in the ancient world, women rely on 3 men in their lives. They rely on their fathers, they rely on their husbands, and they rely on their sons. When you're a young woman, it's your father's job to look after you. When you're an older woman, it's your husband's job to look after you. And when you're older still, it's your son's job to look after you. That's how it worked. And so therefore, what you have in this story, a widow with an elderly father and no son, she's in a bit of a predicament. And so out of concern for this woman's financial welfare, the custom was that the dead man's brother would sleep with his dead brother's wife until she had a son. The son would then inherit the dead man's share of the estate and take care of the widow in her old age. So at this point, the social convention in the ancient Mesopotamian culture is that Onan will give Tamar the son his dead brother could not. The son would then inherit his share of the father's estate. Okay? Good enough. Right. Next sentence. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So the situation now is that Onan's father Judah has 3 sons. When Judah dies, his estate is divided 3 ways. That's 30%, something like that. However, now that is dead, Onan's slice of the inheritance jumps from 30% to 50%, and it will stay at 50% as long as Tamar remains childless. So when his father, according to the customs of the day, asks him to sleep with Tamar, he doesn't want to do it. He has a financial interest in Tamar remaining childless. But nor can he refuse his father's request. That would be unthinkable. So he plays along, right? Every now and again he goes to visit his dead brother's wife. But look at what the narrator of the story says. Whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his seed on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. So there is no warmth in this bed. It isn't even a bed, it's the ground, apparently. There is no openness. What you have here in this moment is a desperate woman. Desperately not just wanting a child, but needing a child. Her life depends on it. And on the other side of the bed, you have a financially motivated, despicable young man desperately not wanting to give her a child. And in so doing, consigning her to a life of poverty and destitution. He is sleeping with a woman about whom he does not care. I don't like this young man. I don't like him at all. And neither it seemed to God. Next sentence. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Why did he die? God didn't like him, so he killed him. Bummer for him. So, question. There's 3 brothers, right? Your brother number 3. How excited are you about sleeping with this woman? Both your brothers slept with her and they died. Just saying. So the text doesn't say this, but for sure this happened. He goes to his father and says, look, I know what the right thing to do here is, but I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. My first brother slept with her, died. Second brother slept with her, died. I ain't dying. I'm not doing it. Sure enough, next sentence. Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, why don't you go live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up and gets a more manly name, for he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. In other words, Judah sends her home to her elderly father with a promise that one day she'll marry his third and final son, but this is a promise he has no intention of ever keeping. So in this sentence, Tamar, the woman, is a widow with an elderly father, no son, and no prospect of ever getting a son. In this sentence, therefore, she is on the brink of disaster. She has no hope and no future. She begins to face up to the fact that she will have no child. And in her Bronze Age culture, that's a huge deal. Many of the oldest stories in human literature come from ancient Mesopotamia, and a huge chunk of those stories are stories about the plight of the childless and the poverty-stricken woman. Next sentence. After how much time? A long time. Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. I won't bore you with the details here, but in ancient Mesopotamia, harvest time, sheep shearing time was, what was it? It was spring break. Enough said? No, you want more said? Okay. It was a time when people made bad decisions. They went to those places to make poor life choices, to blow off steam and get things off their chest. All right, I'll leave it at that. The plot thickens. When Tamar, who has reproduction on her mind, was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim on the road to Timnah. For she saw that although Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. What this is saying, and you'll have to take my word for it, is that she dresses up in the uniform of a prostitute, and she hangs out in the place where prostitutes hang out. This is in Jesus' family tree. We're sitting at the Christmas dinner table and Grandma's there, and we naively say, Grandma, what did you do when you were in your 20s? Tell us a story from your childhood. So She's dressed up as a prostitute in a place where prostitutes hang out, and this place in Hebrew is ironically called Betach Enayim. Betach Enayim in Hebrew means the opening of the eyes, and I say that's ironic because in what follows there are extraordinary blindnesses. Next sentence, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." Personally, I think he needs to work on his chat lines. Particularly the parts that have to do with subtlety. Anyway, so he walks up to his daughter-in-law, who he does not know is his daughter-in-law, and he says, "How much?" basically. She says, "Well, what will you give me to sleep with you?" They're negotiating the price. The price on this occasion seems to be, verse 17, "I will send you a young goat from my flock." Now, men, I'm sure you've been in this position many times yourself, and that you never have a young goat to hand when you want one. So the prostitute, who is his daughter-in-law that he does not know is his daughter-in-law, says, "Well, you say you're going to give me a young goat, but you don't have a young goat with you. So how do I know you'll give me a young goat and you'll keep your word and all that stuff? Why don't you give me," notice what she says, "something as a pledge. Give me something personal. Give me some collateral that guarantees to me you will pay me what you promise to pay me. And on this occasion I will take as collateral your seal, its cord, and the staff in your hand." Next slide, please. The seal in this question is this sort of thing. So people didn't write on paper in ancient Mesopotamia. Papyrus didn't make its way there. People wrote on clay. And when you're signing a legal document, it's kind of hard to sign your signature in clay, I guess. So people signed their signature with a seal. Each person would have a seal. That's the thing on there. Don't know if it's left or right where you're sitting. I'm vague on those details. So they would get a seal carved, the local seal carver. It would be absolutely unique. And if they ever had to sign a legal document, they would just roll it on a piece of clay, and that would be their signature and their guarantee. So this thing that she's asking for is uniquely his. No one else in the world has a cylinder seal like Judah's. There is no question this belongs to him. This is the ancient Mesopotamian equivalent then of Monica Lewinsky's black dress. Right? That's what this is. Then we are told that he slept with her. She became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes. Again, Judah is unaware that he's just done what he's done with his daughter-in-law. At the opening of the eyes, his eyes are closed. At the place where men see, he did not see. Meanwhile, Judah, man of his word, sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his seal back from the woman, but he did not find her. He really needs this seal back. This is embarrassing. So he asks the men who lived there, "Where is the prostitute who was beside the road at Enayim?" "There hasn't been any prostitute here," they said. Next sentence. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result is now pregnant." Now at this point, closed as his eyes are, neither Judah nor the people talking to him in this sentence know what happened at the roadside. All they know is that Tamar is pregnant, and there's a story going around, probably leaked by herself, that she got pregnant by selling her body. So Judah, as a respectable man in the community, is outraged that anyone would indulge in this behaviour, and so he says, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." Okay. Seems harsh. Then we get to the final scenes of the movie. As she's being brought out on her way to execution, she sends a message to her father-in-law, who's having her executed. She says, "I am pregnant by the one who owns these," and she hands over the cylinder seal that is uniquely Judah's and says, "Ask around. See if you know wasn't me, it was him. Maybe you can find out the guy who's responsible for this. This belonged to him. She shows Judah the seal. At this point, Judah goes, I don't know what he says, really. What would you say? My daughter-in-law is pregnant with my son. I'm going to be the father of my grandchild. Next month, I'm going to be on a special episode of Dr. Phil. So, there you go. There you go, boys and girls. That's Tamar. And it's not just that it's in the Bible. There's lots of weird stuff in especially the early bits of the Bible. I mean, strange. But that's in the opening sentences of the New Testament. That's sentence number 3. And this is a story that for me and for you and for any fair-minded person, that even within its Bronze Age context, absolutely ploughs the depths of human filth. There is nothing right about this, and everything is wrong with it. And I don't know about you, but if this was in my family background, like if my great-great-great-great-grandfather had done that, and if my great-great-great-great-grandmother had done that, and that's where I came from, I would not mention it. Ever. I'd gloss over and get straight to the bit where my grandfather invented scissors. So question then, friends. Question. Why is this sentence number 3 of the New Testament? Why, when selecting a list, presumably 10 times the size he eventually edited it down to, did he deliberately include the names of these reprehensible people? Why begin a beautiful story with an allusion to ugliness? According to Aristotle, which Matthew would have known as a bad Jew, the preamble of the story should give readers a clue to the entire story. The entire story should be present in every sentence. That's still true. You know how in a movie, sometimes the director gives you a clue, so the main character takes a knife and puts it somewhere. That's a mental clue that later in the story that knife's important, yeah?
Yeah.
You've seen movies? Just never understood them. Tell us more, Darren. That's just how Matthew would have known this. Here's Matthew's clue then. Here's what I think he's saying, and including this amazing detail. He's saying that the story that saves us all, the story of Christ's birth and life and death and resurrection that changes everything, does not skip the ugliness and the pain and the fear and the disappointment and the ew of life. It doesn't ignore anything. It is embarrassed by nothing. It embraces all in every scene of the story. And it starts here in sentence number 3 in grotesque ugliness. And on the final page of the New Testament story, it ends in joy in heaven. But you don't get to the joy by ignoring the ugly. So, my ugly friends, with complicated lives, difficult stories, and episodes we would all rather erase, hear Matthew's message. Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. And it is good. It is good. It is good. God bless you. Thank you for coming. More on this next week.